When you hear the word genocide, what do you think of? The first thing that comes to mind for most people is what happened to the Jewish people at the hands of the Nazis. The Jewish population lost 2/3 of its population in that area, with roughly 7 million people killed. If you were to look up the biggest genocides in history, indigenous Americans are not on that list, but we should be. During the first 100 years that Europeans colonized the United States, Native Americans lost 90% of their population. The lower estimates are at 56 million gone, and the higher estimates are about 100 million gone. This is how my story starts. For those of you who don't know me, I'm half Native American. I'm a registered member of the Pascua Yaqui tribe. My family can only be traced back a few generations because when colonization happened, most natives eventually were considered conquered, even though I don't like that word. My people, however, were not. The Yaquis, who call their home the Sonoran Desert, which is Sonora in Mexico and Arizona, they were fierce and they fought and fought the colonization efforts until 1955, at which time the war ended, but not because they were conquered, not because someone lost and someone won, but because the times had changed so much, what they were fighting for was no longer relevant. We were in a different world now. When that had ended, many, or I should say most, of our tribe was gone. Everyone separated and went into smaller groups in the surrounding areas. And there's actually a relatively large population of Yaqui people here in the Central Valley. Because my tribe was busy fighting colonization, we didn't assimilate to modern culture the way other tribes did. There were no fancy powwows with booths and vendors. There weren't these vibrant, beautiful colored outfits. We had gatherings. We made decorations by hand, much like the paper flowers you see on the altar. That's how we decorate. We don't buy decorations. We haven't got to that point in our process yet. The deer dancers, their clothes are made of easily accessible fabrics, scraps sewn together, deer skins, and seashells to make noise when they dance. In fact, the deer dance is considered so sacred that when it's performed, no cell phones, cameras, or even a pen and paper to sketch are allowed. As a parent, I do what I can to teach my kids about our traditions and holidays, because if I do not, the cultural traditions I grew up with will be lost for generations to come. Our sacred deer dance and its other deer songs are examples of our religious synthesis with Catholicism and the traditional Yaqui spirituality. As a child, there were many times it never felt real. In school, I loved to learn, and we learned about so many things, but nothing ever had to do with me. Native Americans don't really show up in the history books, and if they do, they talk about the Native Americans on the east near the Trail of Tears, and that's about it. Growing up, when we would learn about slavery or the race wars, I just stayed quiet. What had happened was atrocious, and people deserved to hear all those stories. They were important. While I am proud of my Yaqui heritage, in my youth, I just felt erased. Like my history wasn't important enough to be part of the textbooks. It was not enough to be acknowledged or represented. When I would tell people I was half Native, I'd get comments like, "Oh, everyone is part Native," or, "Oh, you must be an Indian giver," or, "Oh, does that mean all your family's alcoholics?" No, none of those were true. For Halloween, as a child, I would be so excited to pick my favorite costume. It was usually like a cartoon character, or maybe like a spooky witch or a cat. But I would go to school, or I would go trick-or-treating, and I would see kids dressed as me. They were Indians. We were a costume. And I did not realize until I was much older how much that hurt me, and I hadn't processed it. When the U.S. race wars would make headlines, I kept to myself. I was definitely willing to fight for those involved. I marched, I supported, I did my part in having hard conversations, but I still never felt like the race wars applied to me because I was taught that they didn't. It wasn't until recently, with the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement heavily in the news, that I started hearing the term BIPOC. And if you don't know what that means, it means Black, Indigenous, people of color. And that's how they were protesting and marching for all those people with the Black Lives movements, because they recognized what had happened to Indigenous folks here as well. Suddenly, I felt like I belonged. And while most people probably wouldn't be happy about belonging to something that deals with police brutality and racial discrimination and a long history of oppression, for me, it finally felt like I wasn't forgotten. Like me and my people mattered. And I'm just so thankful to see what's going on in our current society, what we're doing with our church, what other people are doing to recognize Native Americans, to recognize their land, and to start to give them a sense of reality that we do matter. We were here and we still are. Thank you.